Welcome, Dr. Philip Murray. Welcome to World Education Summit, 18th edition on 3rd of March at 12:30. Welcome, Philip. Welcome to the WS.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. It's quite an audience to follow on after the panel discussion you've just had. So let's hope I can come up with something interesting to keep everybody entertained.
Welcome, Dr. Philip Murray. Welcome to World Education Summit, 18th edition on 3rd of March at 12:30. Welcome, Philip. Welcome to the WS. So, moving on to the session. So, I request all my audience of World Education Summit, we are giving the exclusive session by Advancing Learning in the New Normal and the Beyond by Philip Murray, Vice President Asia, Blackboard. So here Philip sir is going to demonstrate a wonderful presentation, and I request all my audience, if you have any question, please drop it down. We will take it live with the Philip, and over to you, Philip sir. After that, we will take a Q&A. Session by Advancing Learning in the New
Fantastic.
By Philip Murray, Vice President Asia, Blackboard.
Great.
Philip sir is going to demonstrate a wonderful presentation.
All right, so we might just get started. Thank you very much. I've got a little bit of delay on the audio, so hopefully we'll be okay. Great, thank you very much. All right, good afternoon, everybody. After the panel session we've just had with Dr. Mohan, Dr. Anand, and Professor Rawani, it was an extremely interesting and thought-provoking conversation. So I was thinking about what it was that would be important to discuss after a conversation like that. And I think there were probably three elements that we consider from a technology perspective. When Dr. Mohan was discussing the issue of technology, he was focusing on how it can help. And then there was also a brief discussion about the joy of learning from Dr. Anand, but also one of the challenges was keeping faculty informed and involved in a particularly challenging time. And of course, Professor Rawani covering a broad gamut of the challenges that NIT have faced, but how they've effectively and successfully done that. So I thought what we'd do now was just talk a little bit about how do we see some of these technology challenges being applied, and more effectively, how are they actually becoming useful for institutions to deal with. Now, obviously, over the last 12 months, the challenges have been profound for the industry. I don't think it's any surprise to say that what we are looking at today is unprecedented in its involvement. You know, when we were discussing a little bit earlier, or listening a little bit earlier to the panel discussion, and they were saying that perhaps some of the greatest challenges have faced education have occurred in the last 12 months. I think that's a very fair assessment. Whether or not we're looking at how we're actually teaching, but also what's being taught and where it's being taught, those are the elements that we look at too. But it got me thinking about this. And one of the key issues, of course, when it comes to any challenge, is how do we actually deal with that challenge? What do we actually do from a technology perspective to help an institution deal with that? Now, this is a little bit about Blackboard. Some of you are very familiar with us. You use us currently as your LMS or analytics engines. Others of you, your children or your family members may have attended universities where Blackboard has been the LMS of choice. But of course, we're not the only one out there. There are many platforms that apply, but they're all kind of focused on something similar. And it's about how do we deliver the education requirements for students, educators, and families. Because it's not just about the student, of course, it's about the holistic group, that who wraps around it. So when we consider all of these different elements and trying to put all these pieces together, particularly when we're dealing with what is effectively an unprecedented change in the industry, this is what we were asked. At the beginning of 2020, we were being asked by institutions around the world, how do I bring my institution online? I don't have 6 months or a year to do this. I have 4 weeks. Now, for many of you who have been involved in enterprise resource platform deployments, student information system deployments, any large technology enablement and deployment, this can take 6 to 12 months, really, without really lifting a finger, without really doing much different. 6 to 12 months is a way of delivering something, but being asked to come back and present how we can do what takes normally 6 months and do it in 4 weeks, and making sure that we minimize disruption for everyone. That includes the students, the educators, leadership, and family as well. So it really became a very focused engagement, because we looked at it this way. Whenever we view a challenge or a change in our lives, whether or not it's brought on by our own personal choice, or again, it's forced on us by external events, we all go through this loop, this change journey. It starts off with the status quo. We were where we were, and suddenly this change is applied. It brings about a degree of shock and denial. You know, what's happening? Why is this happening? What's gone wrong? You know, why is this happening to me? And then we move through into the next phase, which is the disruption phase. This is where we're looking at our life and what we have traditionally been comfortable doing. And we are then, those feelings that come out are those of frustration and fear. And I think all of us last year dealt with that. Some of us have continued to have that challenge right through the rest of the year. And unfortunately for some of us, it is still continuing now. So the disruption and the frustration and fear that comes with it. But then we kind of start to come out of this trough, this negative trough, and we start looking at this issue of acceptance and exploration. Exploration, meaning, how do I get out of this? What do I need to do now to change what I've traditionally done? But I have to now accept that the status quo is finished, and that I have to now start looking to rebuild and refocus my efforts. So one of the elements, of course, for us as a technology provider, and it doesn't really matter whether it's an LMS or a new teaching style or opening a new university or a campus, this element is always the same. It's the difference between the depth of the trough in the disruption and frustration and fear stage versus the height that we could possibly get to if we can remove as much of that as possible. And that's what we call the change journey. Now, for many of you that have been involved in this from psychology, organizational behavior, this is very common. You've seen this many, many times. But for some of you perhaps attending today, this might be the first time you've seen it in a graphical form and putting some terms towards it, some reaction, some emotional content behind it, so that you could say, yeah, I did feel that, or I did struggle with that, or that's why that occurred. So dealing with it and trying to reduce the negative trough, trying to flatten the curve, if you would, was the ultimate goal, because by the deeper the curve, the deeper the trough, the harder and longer it takes to actually get to the other side and to move out. So we looked at this as a model which said, okay, how can we start putting this into terminology that from a project management perspective, we can apply? So we came up with these 4 terms. Now, I'm certainly not saying that we invented this. No, this is a well-known project management process, but it's interesting and it was useful for us to actually put it together in how we actually spoke with clients and institutions and organizations and associations around the world. Putting a degree of clarity. What are we trying to achieve now? What are we trying to do? Motivation. Attempting to draw out the motivation about what we need to address and moving people forward. And then establishing what are the capabilities that we had. What were the skills that people had around us, whether or not they came from Blackboard or our partners, or of course from our clients. What are the capabilities we can draw on to help us here? And lastly, what knowledge can we apply and what knowledge can we gain from this activity so that we can use it again and improve it again and again. So this then became a mantra for what we refer to as the rapid implementation plan. Now, sometimes we come across management terminologies which we scratch our head a bit about and go, I'm not sure what that actually means, but this one's pretty straightforward. It's a way for us to look at how do we take what could be a 6 or 12-month program and project and compress it but not miss anything. Right? How do we get it all together so we can deliver it quickly and effectively and replicate it? So we looked at this then as a client journey. We thought about it and said, okay, when we look at these elements right across the gamut of all of the requirements that we have, it really touches on these client journey elements, these subsets, if you would. The awareness. So how are we talking about it with clients, industry leaders, and associations about how do we actually apply this? Raising the awareness about the solutions that might be out there so that that trough of depression, that trough of concern or fear or frustration can be minimized somewhat, because people then have the opportunity to know that there are resources that are out there that can help. And then we move to the onboarding, about getting that information out, getting that information applied and coming up with methodologies that people can feel comfortable with using and that are consistent. One of the great challenges we've found over the many years we've been doing this with clients is that in many cases the hardest step is the first step. How do I do this? How do I deploy a major technological implementation or a change management goal? How do I actually start applying this? And that is one of the great challenges for many institutions. It's the how do I do it? So this is where the enablement part of a program came in. It's matching expectations of a customer with their experiences that they have and trying to align the two of them as much as we can so that we can reduce, again, the frustration and the fear factor that goes with these sort of major projects. And as we continue through, we move into an expansion of that program, rolling out through an adoption and getting them, our clients involved and partners involved in this, students, faculty, and parents as well, all of them involved, so that they have that capability to do this. And then lastly, how do we help optimize and improve it over time? Getting to a go live date is great, but it's what happens after that. So let's just talk about a couple of very quick cases here in India that were undertaken during 2020. One of the first institutions that we applied this new methodology for, the 30-day plan, was Chandigarh University. Now, obviously, as one of the largest private universities in India, the number of students that were required to be moved from a traditional face-to-face engagement over to a fully online, but with minimal disruption or zero disruption, was huge. This was bringing on board 36,000 students in the course of, and I'll show a little bit about a calendar, but literally in the course of a week of bringing them on board. Workshops, enablement, all of those content development requirements, but also applying the technology and deploying it and testing it, making sure that it works with integrations like the student information systems, and then making it available and continuing to support it even after go live. Now, what also happened, of course, was that once we have all this data, and again, the panelists who were speaking a little bit earlier clearly were articulating that with a lot of this work now being moved online, that we have an enormous amount of data. Well, data without a reporting functionality is really useless. It doesn't tell us anything. It doesn't help us. So again, as we continue to move through this process with the institution, we were then able to outline and deploy more insightful institutional reporting via the technologies that were behind the scenes like Blackboard data. My colleagues and our channel partners in the exhibition hall will be talking a bit more about that as well, if you'd like to know more about how that works. But as a general, in a nutshell, what it does is bring together all of the different usage data and make it available for institutional reporting that is live in real time. Nobody needs a report that takes a week to compile. You might as well not bother. But what it does do is allow you to look in real time what is happening, but not just make an assessment based on historical data. It's being able to make an assessment that becomes somewhat predictive of what will happen in the future based on immediate past performance and immediate past behavior. Those of you who have been down the psychology route know that the greatest predictor of future behavior is, of course, immediate past behavior. And having that sort of information available gives institutions a much greater capability to predict with much higher certainty what will be the outcome of a particular program or a cohort or even down to a student. But this was a very large institution, 36,000. Subsequent to Chandigarh University, we have deployed this methodology around the world for lots of other universities. But I wanted to take another example from India as well. And this is GNA. Again, extremely well known, but GNA had a slightly different capability or a slightly different requirement. It wasn't to bring all of their students on board. It was to bring a subset of their students on board. So rather than the whole institution, they needed to bring on a subset, 2,000 students that would be brought on board. But they didn't have 30 days, they had 14 days to do this. And of course, halving a project deliverable doesn't mean that you do the same amount of work in half the time. You end up having to do a lot more than that because you're doing multiple tasks all at the same time. And that was obviously a challenge for everybody, but it allowed us to achieve it more because we were able to focus on what was really important. With the assistance of the teaching and learning team from GNA, they were clearly able to set and agree a goal right at the start about what needed to be done, and we all stuck to the plan. And that's how you can end up doing these sorts of things in 14 days. So, what does that actually look like? When we view this, one of the key elements that we see, of course, is that the development and the capabilities for the planning that goes into it. Now, we can just say, hey, let's do a kickoff and a planning meeting. Well, it needs structure behind it, as I'm sure many of you have been involved in major initiatives at your own institutions or past institutions. The kickoff and the plan sets the tone for everything that happens subsequent to that. So making sure everybody's clear about what's involved, what are we trying to achieve, and when makes it so much easier for everybody. So the kickoff and planning, and these are the elements that we incorporated. In concert with that, and in parallel, the other integration teams were working on the SIS, so the student information system, and bringing that data in and being able to make sure and test it without disrupting the students and faculty that were continuing to work behind the scenes. Then we started on the admin training, making that available to the administrators, to many of the faculty as well, a little bit later in that program, then making it available to all of the faculty so they could test their skills in a risk-free environment, help migrate their content over, and we were doing that, and making sure that all of that would work with workshops and help desks, and also access to all of the Blackboard communities that we have around the world. But of course, trying to create something like this is extremely difficult to do in and on your own. It requires the utilization of best practice. And these best practice methodologies reduce the amount of time that we have to worry about something because we can apply what has been done successfully before. And utilizing this best practice methodology in this allowed us to reduce dramatically the time that we spent, improve the quality of what we delivered, and meet, again, the go-live dates that we were required to. Now, the rest of the slide is grayed out. Expand, adopt, growth, and advocate, because these are works in progress as we continue on. Expanding, looking at what else can be delivered and how it can be approved, what other elements can be adopted, and what other elements can be advocated for. But again, an adoption is not just adding more stuff. It can also be removing elements that aren't quite working as they should and replacing them or removing them altogether. Many institutions have found that when they've looked at this with fresh eyes, when they have looked at it without having to replicate what they've done face to face, a lot of the processes that they were dealing with are redundant, are just not required anymore. And they can look at it with a fresh eye and say, do I really need to have that? Is that adding value, or is that just costing time and money and is not really helping us deliver. So having that fresh lens, and again, the panelists earlier were talking about looking at these in a fresh way, because it will be very difficult for institutions to return to what they did before, because they've seen what can be done now and in the future. So, just as we start to wrap up, I was looking at these and wanted to show you what an example of a 30-day plan might be. Now, for the calendar, this is an artificial calendar, of course, it's just a 30-day plan. But we broke it into 4 discrete modules. For many of these projects, they would overlap and they will be happening concurrently. But other ones, of course, would be quite discrete, and they would be started and completed in a very fixed period of time. But for the ease of understanding, the first week of a 30-day requirement, we would then look at getting contracts secured, project planning and pre-call, assigning teams who are going to be working on what part of the project, and then getting the kickoff calls and the initial deployment of the technology completed. Next, we move into what we refer to as the integrations. So this is where the student information system would start to be brought in, that data would be tested and checked. We would then be looking at different onboarding capabilities for this. How do we help the administrators deal with some of this new workflow that they might need to have without compromising what they were doing? The third break is then how do we help the faculties? How do we help address that? Workshops, teacher readiness reviews, having all of these things available and getting them out there as close to the start of semester as possible. The closer we are to the start of a semester, the closer we are to someone using those new skills, the more likely they are to remember them and use them. Right? We all know what it's like when we go to a workshop and we're taught some new skills, and unless we use them quickly afterwards, we tend to forget them very quickly. Within 2 weeks, we've probably forgotten 50% of everything that we learned in a workshop. So here, having them as close to the start of a semester as we can made it much more effective, because people learned those skills and they were still fresh in their mind. But the last group was the one that really took everybody's effort, whether or not you were from the consulting team, from the SaaS onboarding team, whether you were from my sales team and the SE team. It's the last part of it, which is the live onboarding of all the end users. And again, doing that right at the end, because students would have only received, in many cases, their enrollment data a few days before the start of semester, once their payments had been approved and they'd received whatever documentation was required, and they were then available then to continue that. And then that's why we had the student onboarding. And as we looked at this finally, which was the calendar of activities and breaking that down into a fundamental step-by-step, we could see that there are lots of things that were happening all at the same time, that they were looking at these ways to say, at 9:30 in the morning on the 17th, we're going to be doing this with you and your team. Then another call at 12. This is how it was developed and this is how it was deployed. Now, for an institution to go through and create this whole methodology themselves from scratch, never having done this before, is an enormous ask. But being able to come to someone, the group like Blackboard, and say, we need help to do this, we can come to you with these sorts of step-by-step processes and say, this is exactly what you need to do. And we can do it with you, or in many cases, we can do it for you. So, as we just sort of finish up on this part of the session, it's not just a part of just saying, okay, well, let's go off and teach. Let's go off and do some workshops. Let's go off and hand out some flyers. Well, there's a lot of resourcing that is left behind for the institution to continually reference, whether or not it's templating, video libraries, how-to guides, student orientation guides. All of these elements are then made available and are easily to replicate and can be immediately deployed when needed. Because it's not just one time we'll be doing this. with every new intake of students at the start of a new semester, for many of these resources, they can be used again. We don't have to do the whole project again, of course, but again, a lot of that can be reused and can effectively be applied. So, okay. All right, so this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much, and I will look at some of the questions in the chat.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. Are you getting my voice, Philip, clearly?
Yes, I can. Perfect. Thank you.
So we had all the audience have gone through your wonderful presentation regarding this 4-week strategy to take it the institution online. So Philip, there is a major question that the chunk has been rising, that what are the major challenges you are facing, that you are currently working with the various countries, also you are working various in the deep rooted in the India also. So what are the major challenges you are facing that in India and other countries that has to be overtaken in adapting this online education before COVID and this post-COVID situation? And what are the major challenges you are facing that you are currently working with the various?
So I think there are probably three. Again, the technology part of it is the more straightforward part. Technology is widely available and we have that capability right across the world. But where we do see a challenge is either helping faculty understand there is a new way that they can teach without risk. The second part, of course, is the parental part. What do parents expect for students to be doing? Is it okay for them to say, for me to do a university degree, maybe I could be sitting in my kitchen or in my bedroom doing this? Is that what I'm paying for a university degree to do? So a lot of the challenges actually came from parents. And it's not just in India, it's around the world. So they would come to us and the institutions and say, hey, I'm not sure that this is what an education at a university needs to be, my child watching Collaborate or doing stuff online. When are they going to go to school? Right? So again, that was the second group that we saw. The third group was a somewhat unexpected group. And this was the ministries of education. Many of them were looking at it to say, how do I actually report this? I'd traditionally been used to receiving a report which showed how many students came to class, how many people attended and how long. But now I'm asking for a report for everything being online. And I don't necessarily know how that relates back to accreditation. So institutions were trying to deal with this element with ministries to say, well, the students attending online, they're providing all their assessments online, but then they're also participating remotely. But does that mean that they aren't earning the same quality of a degree or a diploma program that they would have got before? Again, that was the third and somewhat unexpected group.
Thanks, Philip. Thanks for this. And there's some more question that, Philip, we will directly take it offline. And I request all my audience that if you have any questions, if any query, if you want to avail the solution of Blackboard, we have whole team in the exhibition area, so where you can directly chat and directly have a face-to-face meeting with the team of the Blackboard. So by this, we are wrapping up this session, and we would like to present a token of appreciation to the Philip Murray from the World Education side. This is the speaker certificate presented to the Philip Murray, Regional Vice President, Asia Blackboard. Thank you, Philip. Thank you for giving your precious time to this World Education Summit. Thank you very much.